truly African.
Well, hello and welcome to this edition of Wednesday Palaver. This is the platform in which we discuss very, very important issues affecting us, affecting the people of Africa and the world. And just before we came into the studio, I got a call indicating that the value of the cedi has collapsed again. Indeed, we are told that we have reached the point where the cedi is exchanging for the dollar at 13 cedis. It does appear that the prediction that by end of December we will be paying 15 cedis for a dollar is an underestimation of the situation. The dollar or the cedi is galloping. We're also told that the rate of inflation is jumping all over the place. Indeed, Professor Hanke of the USA actually claims that the official rate of inflation is a joke. And that really, if you're talking inflation in Ghana, we should be talking about something in the region of between 50 and 60%. What is the true situation? What is driving the collapse of the cedi? What is driving inflation, the high prices and so on? What is responsible for all of this? Indeed, only yesterday, there was a study which suggested that Ghana's currency, the cedi, is the worst performing currency in the world. Not in Africa, the whole world. Now today we are very, very privileged. We are very, very, very privileged to have with us somebody who knows this stuff. A professor at the University of Ghana Business School, Professor Lord Mensah, who is also a financial analyst. Prof, you're welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
Now, Prof, first of all, let's go through the format of today's program. We're going to be talking to Professor Mensah to be telling us about what it is, what is not, and so on. For some time, maybe 30 minutes or a little more. And then thereafter, we're going to come to the studio audience and we're going to take your questions and your comments and so on. And then thereafter, we're going to go to our studio, our social media platforms and take comments and views. And then we come back to Professor Mensah and then finally we'll round up. Prof, inflation, what is it? What is it that is pushing it up so fast? And what is the impact of that on the lives of ordinary people, the people in the streets and so on? What's the impact of that?
Right. Inflation, I would say, is a statistical and at the same time economics number.
which normally when it comes out, it gives you an idea of the rate at which price has appreciated over the month or over the years. But then here in Ghana this time, so we are fortunate. Statistical Service gives us month-on-month inflation. And as of last month, September, we're looking around 37.2. But then we all know very well in our homes that we don't buy bread. The bread that I was buying last week, by the time I go back to ShopRite, the price has gone up again. So it keeps on increasing. And I always estimate the household inflation, i.e. what put food on our table, right? So the food that we put on our table, if you look at breakfast setting, so your Milo, your bread, your sugar, and all those, if you put them together, the household inflation will be around 70% on the average. Wow. That's how I see it. But then the Statistical Service uses a weighting system where they put all the items that we consume in a basket. The weight on the basket, determines the quantum of goods that are in that basket. So effectively, you get to know that by the time they go through all those processes, the weight will come down. Inflation will definitely come down. So we'll not get the average that me and you, we normally consume in the homes. That to say, okay, fine, at the end of the day, inflation is about 60%. We're going to get a weighted average because they're going to consider building material, they're going to consider all other things, transportation and all those, put them together, and the inflation will come to around that 37.2%. But what it means in your pocket is that prices are increasing. At the end of the day, when you receive your salary this month, you are not even sure what you can consume in the next 1 month. So if you are consuming 3 balls of kenke in a day, and it turns up that the price have gone up. It used to be 2 cedis at that round ball, and then now the price has gone up to maybe 4 cedi or 3 cedi. Now 2 cedi to 3 cedi is about 50% increase. So effectively, you cannot buy the 3 again because your disposable income, the purchasing power has gone down. And that is why usually we use the standard of living, measure to, relate to the inflation. So possibly we look at whether your living standard is improving or not, depends on the purchasing power of what you earn on daily basis. That is how it is. But then if you relate these inflation numbers to, and the rate at which it is increasing to a minimum wage, that is the minimum that if someone should work, he's supposed to be paid. It tells you that at the end of the day, the person cannot buy anything. So effectively, it has a way of eroding, your pockets in your homes. Another thing too is because as a result of this inflation, because people's, salaries, purchasing power goes down, it tends to reduce savings. So savings, that is, if you, after your consumption, as an individual, a rational human being, economic human being, when you receive your salary, you tend to look at your consumption. So consumption, how you pay your electricity bills, your food, maybe some clothing that you wear. Beyond that, then you'll be thinking about your savings. Now, the savings may not come. And when it happens like that, development stalls. Because at the end of the day, when people, get enough to save, that is when the country also develops in infrastructure. Because the savings, some of them can go into short-term investment, which government will also be getting T-bills and other things from there. Banks are doing fixed deposit, indirectly investing with the government as well. And then beyond that, maybe looking at government bonds and other things. Or people taking up some life packages which will feed into insurance and other things. So you realize that if this thing is, inflation is going up, the country's future is more or less something that we may not have to look at. So basically, that's what it means in the space that we are operating as an economic agent.
Well, Prof, how come that those who calculate inflation, the statisticians and so on, sometimes disagree on the level?
Yeah, so
if there's a scientific, foolproof way of measuring it,
yeah,
how come that sometimes they disagree?
Fantastic. So then you may have to look at the methodology and how people are exposed to the methodologies. So as I sit here, like I'm saying, my household inflation, my personal level, the electricity price increment, the kinky that I used to buy, the same size, the price that they are selling it now, and then water consumption. Clearly, it tells you that inflation in my home is more than that 37.2% that is being recorded. But then effective, because I mean, if you should add iron rods and all those, I don't regularly buy iron rods. So, so I look at what I consume on daily basis, and with fuel and all those, then I can tell you that yes, indeed, my inflation at my personal level is around 60%. But then, because people are not into detail when it comes to the formulas that are being used by the Statistical Service, I think it's about time they release those formulas for all of us to study it and then get to know that this is what they are doing, and effectively it should give more weight to maybe my household consumption or not. Probably in the formula that they are using, they are giving more weight to construction materials, which is not to the ordinary person's level, which is not to the person who picks trotro from his house to work every day's level. Maybe he's not even as of iron rods price before. But then he is looking at how transport has increased, how kinky has increased. That is the level where his consumption is, concentrated. So we may get it differently depending on how you are looking at it from your perspective, and then possibly scientifically how you are, building up the basket. And like I'm saying, if the Statistical Service should make up the basket available to everyone, to know that, okay, fine, this is what goes into it. At the end of the day, the weightings that we are placing, if you place more weight on construction, this is how the inflation will look like. And then if you place more weight on, the weight itself vary. And even within the weight, it changes over time. So if you place more weight on construction, and I would advise that in times like this, this is difficult times. Now, people are not thinking about putting up houses, because they're thinking about how they can survive on daily basis. So the weightings that are used by the Statistical Service shouldn't be static. It should be dynamic, because now we're thinking about how we can survive the next day. Exactly, how to eat kinky the next day. So at this time, the weight should be on household consumptions, especially food. So effectively, the weight should be dynamic. But then it could be that maybe the Statistical Service uses static weight, and that can give up different, different outcome when we are doing the computations.
And Prof, what is it that is pushing the rate of inflation up, so fast? I mean, I recall that not too long ago we had single-digit inflation.
Yeah, we were boasting of it.
And in fact,
being happy with it.
Exactly. Between NDC and NPP, it was about who could maintain single-digit inflation. Now, bam, 40-something%. What is causing this havoc?
Yeah. So we're looking at the economic structure of Ghana. It's more or less import-driven economy, i.e., is an economy where even if the product that we see on the shelf is locally manufactured, that product has an input which is imported. So if you are manufacturing, for instance, maybe cement, you're looking at, certain, input to the cement that is being imported. And once is imported, you have that price build-up. So we're looking at, maybe if I'm importing from Turkey, the product from the Turkey factory to, the, what do we call it? The Turkey harbor or Turkey port will have some price. And the price is increasing because these days, global inflation is increasing. So part of it is imported here. So from the factory to the, the port, and then the freight on board that will get to Ghana. Okay, so container price has increased as well. Then we're looking at from our port here to the shelf where the item is. So these are where the prices are building up and gradually get to us. And somebody will ask, why is cocoa that expensive? Because cocoa will not go through that kind of dynamics that I've elaborated. Now, the one selling cocoa, we call something, price increase, relative price increase. So the one selling cocoa also knows very well that the attire that he's using to sell the cocoa, which makes him look presentable, which is probably being imported from, Turkey. By the time he goes to the shop, or she goes to the shop, that attire, the price has what? Gone up. So he will feed that price into the cocoa price. The same cocoa seller must carry the cocoa in a car and then send it to the destination where he's doing what? The roasting. So effectively, it will turn up that, the price build-up will feed into the local, prices as well. So it won't be surprising to see Kenke price going up, because maybe the maize that was produced somewhere at, the north has to be transported, to, Accra.
Yeah.
So you realize that once transportation cost goes up, all these, prices, also goes up because of what? The movement. And in every economy, without movement, you don't have economics. Economic agent must move to have economics. Now, what is happening here is that once the price builds up in transportation, okay, it builds up into other, products. And obviously, exactly. So effectively, these are things that are driving, and we have control over it, which over the years we have ignored, in a sense that if you ask a typical driver on the street, ask him what is making your transportation price go up, he will tell you two things. One is the spare parts that they buy. Two, fuel. Fuel price, I would say we don't have much control over, but there are two drivers. The fuel price is one of them, and then the spare parts. So the fuel price, you don't have control over it. But what you have control over is the spare parts purchases. Now, over the years, have we committed, right, the borrowings that we've done over the years, have we taken a bold step to say that at least by the time my 4-year regime ends, I should be able to complete, inner roads in Accra, maybe possibly looking at outside roads, inter-district roads, for about, let's say, 80% of it. That will go a long way to save the spare parts purchases, because we know very well that the cars that we drive, none of the parts that we manufacture in Ghana here. So effectively, it will reduce the importation of what, the spare parts, and then possibly reduce even, our demand for the dollars. So whilst we are looking at, targeting inflation, which, we see the Monetary Policy Committee meet every now and then, and now it's like they've thrown their hands in the air. They must increase, the policy rate to a level where it will catch up with inflation. Other than that, we won't have an economy. So, because the real returns on investment as we speak now is negative. So effectively, it has to turn up that, they have to be increasing it up to the time where, the policy rate and the inflation rate will be apart. Then we can have, an economy that will start having its grounds. So effectively, it has to do with the price build-up, and then locally, that relative price, build-up as well, and then the transportation cost. Because if you anchor on transportation cost, you realize that it will feed on all the other, prices. And so that is why countries sometimes take the bold step to say that, okay, fine, we are going to commit to roads to make sure at least we satisfy, up to maybe 90% of our roads, to ensure that we reduce, spare parts purchases. So once we are looking at the monetary side, the way we spend also plays a role in controlling inflation. We've seen food inflation driving the inflation, drives. Disaggregation. Now you realize that we had a policy, which, if you go, I always give my students an assignment. If you really want to know the focus of a government, take our budget, right? The budget and policy statement every year. And then if you're talking about sustainability, just type sustainability word and see how many times it has been repeated in the budget. It tells you the government's attention on that particular policy. I also tell them that, okay, fine, pick the policy and look at planting for food and jobs. Now, from 2016 all the way coming up, several times you see this planting for food and jobs repeated in our budget with allocations. It's not just repeated, for wedding sake, but it has what do we call it? Allocations, funds allocated to it. And you are asking yourself, why would food inflation drive, our inflation if you disaggregate them? Now, if I know very well that at the end of the month, if I receive my salary and it will turn up that food will be cheaper, right? It has a way of building up into other things. The driver that is trying to increase his, his fares knows very well that at least food, for that aspect, he's going to be cushioned. So even if he's fighting for an increment, he's not going to do that increment as much as he knows very well that food price is increasing, fuel price is increasing. Fuel price you don't have control, but food at least you should have control. And so we have failed in our fiscal side, which is the expenditure lines that we do, and then the monetary aspect of it.
Now, Prof, only yesterday the World Bank claimed that Ghana's inflation is driven by local factors and not external factors.
Sure.
What does this mean?
Well, local factors, of course, once we know very well that I mentioned transportation is one of them. Transportation is not, Ukraine war. Neither is it COVID. Neither can you say it's an American interest rate that is going up. As I mentioned, okay, fine, we can have external factors in there. But the question is, okay, what is feeding into fuel price increment? That is what is causing transportation increment. And if it turns out that the price build up in the transportation business, these two factors are driving it, and the driver hasn't got control over it, obviously he will slap it on the one who is going to patronize that, truck business. So effectively, the local factors can be so many things. It could be, our what do we call it? Exchange rate as well, because the exchange rate has its own way of building up into, the inflation. Because if the one selling knows very well that if I put this phone out there on the market, and then it's going for $2 equivalent of the Cedi, and the phone is not manufactured in Ghana, and I'm not sure how the rate will be in the next 2 months, what will happen is that the uncertainty around, the price that I'm anticipating, the expected, I'll slap it on the current price so that the consumer will pick it up. So you will see prices, going up every now and then. So it has to do with
part
more.
of it is speculation.
Yes, naturally it's there. While we have the economic structures causing the problem, most of the dynamics in terms of the price build-ups are speculated. And especially in an environment where we have uncertainties hanging on the economy. As we speak now, the uncertainty is so much. World Bank comes with its report, it says this. Country manager of World Bank says this. You see the politician also saying different things. And so the whole system is more or less, very, very uncertain. And you could see that people are not sure of what is going to happen in the next, 1 week. Somebody asked me, how is he going to survive in the next 1 week? That's the question he's going to ask me. So effectively, the uncertainty hanging on the economy, that is also, an aspect of it. But we have the structural problem, already in existence.
Now, Prof, the speculation, let's put the speculation aside. Is there an organic relationship between the galloping inflation and the fall in the value of the cedi?
Oh yes, it does.
Organic relationship?
Yes, there is. There is a strong relationship between that. Let's look at it this way. So, for sure, an importer, right, knows very well that the dollar will be 12 cedi in the next 3 months going into Christmas festivities. So we are 2 months into it, right? 2 months. This importer, knowing very well that he's certain of the dollar, very well the price that he's selling now, taking into consideration his margins, he's sure of, because whatever you are importing, your cedi, right, has to be converted to dollars before you move out. Now, before you can import again. So effectively, it tells you that if I'm not certain on the next moment of of the dollar, I have to increase price. So there's a relationship. If I'm not sure of the dollar in the next 3 months, I have to increase price to beat up that uncertainty. And so it keeps on going up. But then you realize that you can increase price to match up with what the inflation and then the exchange rate. But at what point will the consumer be able to absorb that price? Because the consumer can buy, but when it gets to a certain price, he won't come again. So you open the shop and then you won't get people to buy. Then you will be better off closing the shop for 3 days and then go on strike rather than, you know, sitting there for nobody to come and buy. So you realize that they go hand in hand. Once the exchange rate, you know, goes up, obviously you should expect that inflation will also be brought up. So the Monetary Policy Committee, you realize that they know very well that the inflation, you know, the policy increase in catching up inflation, they've lost control. But they are doing it anyway. The reason why they are doing it is in the sense that they believe that, okay, fine, the inflation that we are looking at now is as a result of excess liquidity at the upstream, you know, economic level. If I say upstream economic level, what I mean is at the bank level, between the central bank and the government. How the central bank, how the central bank is lending to banks, and banks, you know, in turn borrow to invest in government. So at that level, they see that kind of, you know, liquidity. So they will increase the policy rate in a way to whet the appetite of the banks to what? Invest, rather than to buy the dollar and hold it as a store of value. So what is happening now is that the rate at which, you know, interest rate is going up and the rate at which the inflation is going up, the dollar has now become more or less an asset without even holding it in an investment to attract interest. So I can see that there's a lot of dollars onshore. People prefer holding the dollar, keeping it in their homes, than to keep it even at the bank. Well, they know at the bank, government can come up with a regulation the next day and say that all dollar investment can be converted to cedis with a special interest rate. So they are keeping it in their houses. So that is what is happening. So they go hand in hand. There's a strong correlation between the two, which we always compute in statistics. And organically, that's the explanation I've given you.
Why is the dollar so powerful?
Yes, the dollar is powerful because we've turned up our economy to be...
In fact, there's a comedian that I watched only this morning who says that if you look at the Cedi, it has 6 heads on it. If you look at the dollar, it has only one head. How come the one head is stronger than 6 heads?
Oh yes, it has to do with the economy. You know, an economy where you've oriented the economy to the point where dollar becomes more or less a medium of exchange, a comfortable medium of exchange. Yes, it's like it's bound to happen that the dollar will be powerful. We don't print dollars. How do we get dollars into our environment? There are 4 different, I can say 6. 1, through loans that we take from outside. So we're looking at Eurobond monies coming in, cocoa syndicated loans coming in. The next one is remittances. And remittances, if the economies over there are not doing well, people will not be comfortable to remit here. The next one is aid and grants that we get. And for that one, achieving that lower middle income status, I think some of them are not coming again. And then the next one is exports that we do. So we're looking at possibly, you know, our goods that we export and the proceeds that comes. Now, another thing that we are not doing well on, over the years, you realize that we've been managing the dollar, the demand for the dollar, using loans. That is what has been happening. And if you break down those who demand the dollars, I always classify them into 3 economic agents. 1, which is the biggest one, is the government himself. 2 is the businesses. And then 3, individual homes, as we go and transact and all those. I mean, to maybe buy something outside, or maybe for our individual satisfaction, for transactional purposes. But the government, being the biggest demander of the, you know, the dollar, has not been doing well, in a sense that if you borrow, we're supposed to replace the monies that we've borrowed with production. Production is an indirect way of supplying the dollar. That's what happens. Because if you produce, let's say, our staple like rice, and you reduce rice importation by 50%, you realize that you will not use dollar anymore because you are going to consume locally. So effectively, your dollar that you get from export stays. Now, borrowing over the years has not helped us because we failed in our first time of borrowing. The first time of borrowing, which was 2007, we discovered oil, and then quickly we jumped to the Eurobond market to go and look for money, using oil as collateral, using other revenue that we generate as collateral. But then after borrowing, we couldn't account for what the money came to do. Then subsequently, if you go into the prospectus that subsequent governments have been using over the years, you will realize that they state categorically that we're going to borrow to offset existing debt and then use the rest of the proceeds to come and grow our economy. So if government knows very well, okay, fine, some interest obligations are maturing and then some principals needs to be paid and I need 1 billion, government goes to borrow 2 billion. 1 billion settles the existing debt, and then 200 million comes into our environment to shore up the dollar demand, and then also do that kind of dollar activity. So we have not been able to convert the liabilities, which is the borrowing that we do, to the production that we need to ensure that we reduce the dollar demand. That is what has brought us this far and making the dollar more powerful. Excuse me. So if you take government being the biggest demander of the dollar, normally government has been doing it this way. They go to the Eurobond market. When they get funds,
production team, can we get water for Prof?
When they get the funds, they come and put part of it here, and so you see the pressures coming. But we're able to manage it within a year because of some of these inflows. So you realize that if you take the plot of our dollar to the Cedi over the years, there's a strong trajectory going up. But within the strong upwards trajectory, you will see a wiggle. And that wiggle tells you that within the years, we manage them. We manage them with the inflows of cocoa syndicated loan, but structurally, every year it penetrates a new discrete number. So we'll be at 1 this year. The next year will be at 2. The next year will be at 3. This year alone, we are unfortunate. We've penetrated about 5 discrete numbers. Because we started a year with 6.2 or something. Now we are heading towards 13. So 5 different discrete numbers that we've penetrated. So effectively, it tells you that the government himself, because the Eurobond has been frozen on us, because we can't go there anymore, because of the interest rates that we are likely to pay. It's not that when government goes to the Eurobond market, they cannot raise money. They can raise money, but they cannot bear the cost. Because on the market, you can get junk bonds also being sold. And then quality bonds are also being sold. So it's a matter of classifying your bond as a junk one, for which you pay more higher coupon and then attract the necessary funds that you need. But we can't sustain the interest payment that we are doing. That is why government did not go to the Eurobond market. And the reason why I can comfortably say that we have been using loans to manage our economy is that all other things, if you look at what brings about inflows of the dollar into our environment, all other things, right, has come in. Cocoa syndicated loan is in. We can talk about inflows, remittances are coming in and other things. The only missing item that we are not getting this year is the Eurobond money. And because of the Eurobond money, that is why the dollar is skyrocketing like that.
Now, Prof, what about the politics of the economy? And I refer to the politics of the economy, for example, because we do know that Russia is offering us fuel, energy, at a rebated price. Okay? So if we were to buy our crude from Russia, buy our energy requirements from Russia, we would not have to pay so high.
Sure.
Perhaps the only reason why we are not buying crude from Russia is because we want to follow the Americans. Sure. And that's a political decision rather than economic decision. What about the politics of the economy?
Yeah, it has a role to play. I always say that you cannot dissociate politics from the economic management, because who is the policy maker? He's a politician. He turns out to be the leader. But then let's look at the dynamics over the years. Clearly, I always look at, I tie the economic dynamics to political regimes. Get to know whether a particular administration is doing well or not. So effectively, you cannot dissociate policy making from, So you have decided to follow the Americans because you know very well that, in your environment, everything is denominated in dollars, not in rubles. So even if you're supposed to purchase, from Russia, maybe you know the economic consequence. Europeans are shying away from Russian products. And our economy as it sits here may not solely rely on Russia. I know there's a strong connection between Russia and China. But then, these are not the economies that we rely on. We are the receiving end.
But we could reorient the economy.
We can, in terms of politics. But then at the end of the day, the economic costs, maybe we cannot, carry it over the years. And that is why possibly it will be prudent to keep to, the American standards.
Well, friends, comrades, and studio audience, this is where we are, and I'd like us to give Professor Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School another round of rousing. Well, at this stage, it's your turn. Questions and comments ought to be brief, because you don't have all evening. So how many of you want to raise questions? How many of you want to make comments? Just show by your hands. I can count. Show by your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So each of you has 1.5 minutes. We are starting with you.
Okay. Prof, thanks for the narrative. Can we say from your narrative, it is clear that we are not experiencing inflation, but rather hyperinflation? 2, can our debt overhang be relieved?
Well, 1 minute. Okay, so go ahead.
Okay.
Right.
But 2 questions should be enough. Because of our time.
Okay. How do we avoid contagion of default and contagion of insolvency?
Right. So your first question.
No, be easy.
Your first question.
Let's take all of them.
Right. So then I may have to write them down. Can I get a pen, please?
Yeah.
So.
Contagion of something contagion. Hey,
So give me a minute. Give me a minute, please. So you were talking about hyperinflation or not, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then 2, our debt levels, whether it is sustainable or not. Okay. Sustainable debt level. And then 3, contagion in debt, right?
Yes.
Okay, spillovers in insolvency.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you again for all that we have heard from you. The way I see it is that if I am managing my household,
Yeah.
and I'm not doing well, maybe my wife will say, listen, could you allow me to also
Take over.
Yeah, take over.
Right. Okay.
It might be a political, but the chancellor, the finance minister in the UK, he was sacked because he having done something to some of the people opinion that he is right, and the thing that affect the pound. Don't we also think that for the past 6 years, our financial minister is not doing a good job, that he also needs to be sacked?
Okay, mine very, very brief. We live in a country whereby we grow what we do not eat, and we eat what we do not grow. Doesn't matter. Someone, instead of buying from Brown, they'll prefer to import. And I don't know if it's low estate or hypocrisy. Yeah, you touched on rights then, and the rest have been okay. Those who are less privileged or more fortunate to drive through the American city example, see that in the open space of the city, they even want plantation whereby they are saving. But there is none going on here in our system. So I think that you being a financial economist, there should be something that should be real structured. I don't know, basically from the scratch, so that we can be productive. Because I think that
brief. Yes. Next.
We are very grateful to you, Prof. My question is this. Are we not sure that the type of economy, I can say it's maybe neoliberal economy that the government is undertaking, is what is affecting this kind of inflationary issues? And that as recent as last year, there was an issue that an amount of about 200 billion Ghana cedis was printed. And we know inflation proceeds a period of when more money are chasing fewer goods, we are not producing. So don't you think these are some of the things we are not farming, we are not doing that's affecting us? Thank you.
Okay.
Prof, thank you. You've spoken very good. Thank you very much. I think the dollar is our opponent now. And the gold is our weapon. Do you think
the gold is our weapon and the dollar is our opponent?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you think the way we are managing our dollar distribution in the system and the way we are managing the production of gold, how does it affect the physical, economical aspect of which we are an expert?
Prof, thank you very much. Mine is not a question, but I am agitating the finance minister. Why are we still keeping him there?
Are you the one keeping him there?
I don't know, because I don't know, because this man has failed this country, and the president is still keeping this finance minister there. Look at the dollar now; it's 13 cedis now. By next week, we don't know how much the dollar is going to be. Look, the media is failing us. Seriously, because Prof, things are happening in this country. Things are very costly in this country. Thank you very much.
Okay, Prof, just a quick one. I have 1 minute. I don't know whether it's a contribution.
1 minute, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Thank you. So the problem is that we grew up in a system that tells us the government has got no business doing business. Am I right? That it should create an enabling environment for people to do business. Today, as we speak, in fact, when I was on my way here, I heard Guta announcing to people, traders and anybody that matter, to close their shops tomorrow to demonstrate to government that it has failed. Even in creating the enabling environment, government has failed. I know you are being diplomatic by not saying that we are living in the failed state. But if you look at all the things you have mentioned, we have failed. The government has failed. Secondly, we talk about food, we talk about cocoa and all of those things. Every year, like you're saying, the government makes allocation for planting for food and jobs. Is it that the things they are growing are not growing? If they are not growing, why waste our money? Why allocate money every year into this? So you can go on and on and on, and it's clear that we have failed the people of this country. And in fact, the government has failed the people of this country and must set up or hand over the baton halfway.
Okay, thank you. And we've exhausted the 7 questions, right?
Yeah, Prof.
Okay, then. So someone was asking whether we are in a hyperinflation or galloping inflation. I can tell you that the inflation we're experiencing now, we experienced it somewhere before our democratic dispensation, say before 2000. So we're looking at 90s inflation. That was when we're recording inflation of about 45%, and even that one we are yet to penetrate there. But then the household inflation. So for you to say something is hyper, then you have to look at the relative records over the past. And if you can relate it to the past, then I can tell you that we find ourselves in a hyperinflation. Yes, we are in that situation now. But then our debt levels and how sustainable it is, we've gotten to a point where we've lost it. It's not sustainable anymore. It's not sustainable anymore. That's why we had to go to IMF. But even before the IMF comes in, we have to position ourselves to make sure that our debt is sustainable. And that is why we proposing, or we foresee, that there's a possibility of debt restructuring, i.e., if government owes you treasury bills, or maybe, bonds, right? Normally the long term will be targeted first. The government owes you bonds, and it turns up that it's 5 years. Government can say, okay, fine, we are prolonging it for 10 years. But then for the coupons that you'll be receiving in between the 10 years, the principal that you're supposed to receive, we can have it. That is more or less something that is likely to happen. In a way, it cushions the government, because as we speak now, the interest payment alone on our balance sheet, if you read the budget, it takes about 50% of our revenue. So government must position itself, right, in such a way that if IMF can, because IMF's money is not used to settle debt. It's money that is used to settle, restructure the economy, for the economy to pick up again. So because it is very tempting at the point where you are choked, if they bring in money, you go and use it to settle your debt. They may want you to structure yourself in such a way that when they bring the money, that money can make impact. So government was supposed to call in for the debt restructuring before even the engagement with the IMF. I don't know why they are hiding behind the IMF to come and tell Ghanaians that it's IMF that will, allow us to do the restructuring. But the finance minister and his team must tell Ghanaians that at the point where we find ourselves, we can't do anything, but we must restructure our debt, especially the internal one, because that is the soft side to start from. The external one has its own problems, because it's not a Bretton Woods type of debt. It's not a debt that you borrow from World Bank. It's not a debt that you got from IMF. It's a private man's money, and somebody's pension somewhere that they've come to put here. You can't do anything than to pay. So that's why they are starting internally. So effectively, if you listen to the IMF statement today, they are indicating that provide debt sustainability report and then we'll get a deal with you. In a way, they are telling Ghana that getting into your budget, the 2023 budget, which will be ready in November, we have to position ourselves to be humble children, to be, a country that we are ready for a program. And therefore, when the IMF comes in, they limit your expenditure, and then they push you to enhance your revenue generation. So we won't be surprised to see some tax realignment, tax reallocations, and then possibly, cutting down some expenditures. So some promises that were made, like Agenda 111, we may not see it, reflecting in the new budget as it's supposed to be. So government is going to be conserved as much as possible in the 2023 budget. So I can tell you that our debt has gotten to an unsustainable situation. That is why we had to go to IMF. The last one is whether there is that kind of spillovers in insolvencies. I don't know what you mean by that, but are you looking at spillovers from other countries to us here, or spillovers from Ghana to other countries? If I may get it clear, the contagion effect in the debt. I don't know what you mean by that.
Let's start looking at how the overspending.
Yeah.
We won't be able to pay the debts.
Yeah.
So other SMEs
Right. So what is going to happen is that the IMF will tone us down. We have no choice. And I always make a statement that our interest rate, the inflation and all those, we have bubbled to a point. And the bubble must burst. And it will only burst through interventions. So interventions with IMF, when at a point in time they tell the government, don't borrow much. If government does not borrow much, obviously interest rate structures comes down. So you will see the bubble that we are facing now started coming down. So it must burst to a level. So effectively, it has to do with intervention that will control some of these things for us. The next person is management change, right? So you want the finance minister changed. Yes, I do support your call. I mean, clearly, I don't know the benchmarks that were given to the finance minister before he took over. But usually, if you are given a benchmark and you are deviating, you are sacked. Because the best finance manager is the one, or economic manager, is the one that is able to project and ensure that what is being realized in the future is close to what is projected. Then you turn up to be a good economic manager. Because you have to be running all your possibilities, the uncertainties that you are likely to face, possible Ukraine wars, possible COVID issues and all those, for us to determine whether you are good or not. So effectively, if you look at the numbers, look at inflation, which we are heading towards, democratic era inflation, it tells you that yes, the man is not working. But let me tell you one thing. The actual job of this finance minister started somewhere in 2019. Because the reason I'm saying this is that before 2019, we were still with IMF. And IMF was holding our budget. They restrict us, they tell us. So the current administration, as we speak now, the time that they had their free space to manage the economy started in 2019. And that was when we started reading huge budget deficit, 11% of our GDP. But when we were with IMF, we were doing almost 6%, penetrating the 6%. So it tells you that, immediately we jump out of the IMF, then our managerial techniques and prowess that we're supposed to use to jump in, the finance minister started spending anyhow, aggressively. So effectively, that aggressive posture and how he was not able to situate it to fit an economic management where we have social undertone, to know that, okay, fine, we are managing the economy, we can borrow at a certain speed, but the monies that you are borrowing should have some social undercover to it. For that side, I think he got it wrong. And if anywhere, right, they would have pushed him to step aside. Yes. The next one has to do with plant importation and planting for our own food, right? Somebody talks about, he said what we must plant what we eat, right? Yes, that's a good call. I always make an example that cocoa is one of the main products that we export. How many of us can we say that, okay, fine, I've planted cocoa as a symbol that, okay, fine, it's a flower that I cherish. So coming to your compound on the entry, I see cocoa. So this is a national symbol to give us the idea that this is what gives us money. And our generations come in every now and then will know that, okay, fine, even if I have my small corner and I plant cocoa around it, I should be able to get something. I do planting a lot because of my background. I grew up in a village, before I went to secondary school. So that was around, let's say, 1993 thereabout. And coming from the village, farming has been part of me all this while. And I grow everything, like when it comes to contemporary and all those, I don't buy them from outside. I grow them around me. I grow my plantain, I grow my cocoyam, all those things around me in my house, in Accra here. So effectively, if we adapt that culture, I think we used to have that life, isn't it? When, even at a school level, we were not seeing reading as punishment. We're seeing reading as a way of living. At the end of the day, we have days that we go to farm. Fridays we go to farm. If you grow up in the village, that's what. And so that culture of planting your own, small consumption at your backyard, if we should revisit it, it should have a long way to control the inflation that we are talking about here. At least we'll minimize, exposure to importation. That's how it is. And then the other one is, the fourth one says open economy. So don't I think it's the open economy that we are running that has caused us to, this level. Yes, open economies has an advantage and it has its own disadvantage. You open your economy for trade. That is very, very important. But then, you see, if you go back to Adam Smith and if you take economics, somebody will always say that, okay, fine, this is not practical, this is theory, but the theory serves as a benchmark. God, in his own way, has positioned us to a location on the globe. And that location has its natural benefit that we must enjoy. You take advantage of your natural state. So we know very well that in our environment, we can grow rice, we can grow cocoa, we can grow maize, right? If you take our import, portfolio, rice shouldn't be part of it. we should make it a conscious effort because we can grow them here. If you can grow it in your environment, I don't see the reason why you should go on international trade with it. But then also comes back to Uncle Kwesi's, what about the politics of it? It will turn up that the politician is the one that is importing the rice. So the policy that is supposed to grow rice, he will not support it. Even if he's going to support it, all the monies that has been allocated for planting for food and jobs will go into capacity building. It won't go to the field. So they will be training people in hotels without necessarily going to the farm. So these are things that are likely to happen. But then in the end, if we make it a conscious effort that we must grow, I mean, what we can survive with in our environment, it should go a long way to save, you know. As I mentioned earlier, the borrowing that we're doing, right, we could have replaced it. So whilst we're borrowing, we could have replaced it with production. So we borrow to go into maybe rice farms, do serious irrigations where we can produce rice all year round without necessarily, you know, limiting it to nature to determine the rice product for us. So when it's raining, you get rice. When it's dry season, rice is gone. No, if you have a good policy, agriculture policy, your production should be all year round because you have irrigation in place that is supplying water every now and then. So effectively, open economy, it is good, but you must identify your strength because that is how economics works. It has to do with games. Once you identify your strength as a country, you work towards it, and that should be able to lift the country up. The next one is 5, which is the production of gold and its impact. So dollar at what? I didn't get that question. Was dollar at hand?
As our opponent.
Okay, so the dollar is what? Our opponent, and gold, and the way we are handling gold. You see, growing up, we've been mining all this while. I grew up at Akweti. I come from, you know, that environment very well. So Galamsey myself, I've been in it before. I stopped Galamsey when I was in university 3rd year. That was when I stopped because without it, you can't survive in that enclave. So what is happening is that Galamsey, well, it's been helpful, right? But then in our case, the experience we are having now is the leakages. If the economy can gather, you know, if you look at Galamsey, the full meaning is gather and sell, right? Gather and then sell. If the entire economy can gather all the the gold produce that we do at that small scale mining centers, and then without that kind of Arab leakages and all those, it should go a long way to save the dollar. But what is happening is that because of the disintegrations, when we're growing up, we used to have GCD, Ghana Consolidated Diamond Limited, which was mining a large scale. We used to have, you know, Obuasi gold mines, and then small other, relatively small other gold mines around the country. But then, you know, there was kind of control by the Minerals Commission, which at the end of the day, we were able to realize our inflows that come from. But then with the rate at which we have disintegrated, you know, the gold production through Galamsey, there's a likelihood that we can have a lot of leakages. We'll have Arabs maybe coming in. We have people coming from India to buy gold here. And so, but then accountability as to the kind of dollar that this, what do we call it, this gold sales are making for us, it will be difficult to determine because of the way we have disintegrated, you know, the kind of the gold production. So somebody says, why are we keeping, you know, the finance minister? Again, repeated. I think that one has been answered, isn't it? The last one is, government has no business doing business. Yes, indeed, government has no business doing business. But government has a business of creating the necessary platform for business to leverage on. What is happening in this country is that for the past 6 years, government seems to be doing business without the private man. The reason why interest rate has been up there without coming down is as a result, government is doing business. That's why I always say, government is doing business because government policies that is supposed to channel through the private sector, they are engaging the people themselves. So when you take, for instance, we're here when NBSSI, right? At the point where, you know, minimum capital requirement for a bank was 400 million, to establish a bank, and a bank that is going to establish branches, going to have, you know, people having access to loans to go and do their businesses and all those. The multiplier effect of establishing a bank. Bank's minimum capital was 400 million. We were here when government, you know, gave, you know, 600 million to MBSSI in the form of what? You know, loan. And at what rate? Okay. NBSSI, at the point where they were taking the money, I indicated that they stand to be a bank on its own because they have 600 million now. And that 600 million should be able to create that multiplier effect that a typical bank can create. So effectively, that money went into MBSSI because the government agency, the money will be used for other things. When you ask for the accountability, right, it will be a problem in the medium to what? Long term. Of course, that money will be seen as kind of a social, you know, project. Let's take something like NAPCO. The monies that was pumped into NAPCO could have gone into a bank, right, to serve as what? A loan. The bank will identify the individuals who are capable of using the money, right, to create jobs, like the model they want to adapt for the You Start Now. That should have started a long time. By this time, would have realized the impact. But government took it upon itself to do that business by engaging these NAPCO trainees, and then at the end of the day, we don't even know the social impact of what has been created. So effectively, it's government that has been doing business. Businesses are not doing business because they can't have access to funds so easily. Let me put it that way.
Now, this is all time would allow us. I wish that we could go on and on. As it is, we have overrun and eaten into news time. But nonetheless, we've had a very pleasant evening, very fruitful evening, discussing all of these matters. I'd like to end with a very simple statement. You know, private business, its focus is on the accumulation of profit.
Yeah.
Multiplying its investment. Sure. It is not the duty of private business to make sure that every citizen has kinky to eat. It is not the duty of private business to make sure that for the sake of it, children go to school. Private business puts money in schools only if it can double the money. Private business is a money doubler. It's like agrada. You understand? And I think that's important for us
agrada in a mechanized way.
In a mechanized way. So it's important for us to understand that. Now we are so very, very grateful to Professor Lord Mensah of the University of Ghana Business School for coming to share his knowledge with us and with our viewers. Unfortunately today we cannot take comments from our social media platforms, but please stay on the social media platforms. We can still exchange messages on the social media platforms. So let's stay on the WhatsApp platform, let's stay on the Facebook platform, and let's continue this discussion until I'm not sure, because it looks like the economy is headed for a crash.
Oh no, it will be rescued. With IMF, I think we should be fine.
So please stay with Pan-African Television. We'll bring you the best in everything until we meet again next week. It's goodbye from Makiza Latifa, the producer, and Adam Lumo, our director. Red salute to the producer, red salute to the director, and red salute to everybody. Bye-bye.